Joining us now, House of Delegates member, Northern Virginia, Marcus Simon. Delegate Simon, it's been a long time. Great to have you back, man.
Hey, John, it's great to be with you.
I know, right? Let's get to this Amendment 1, can we? We haven't really paid attention to it since it finally passed the House and the Senate in the last session. Now it goes on the ballot. What Amendment 1 is, this is a new way to redistrict Virginia or to set the district lines. One Virginia, the object is there's about 8 people they put together. Some are politicians, some are just regular people, and they draw the lines rather than they say the politicians or the legislators themselves. And it did pass the Senate and the House 2 times straight, which makes it an amendment. It's Amendment 1 on the ballot in Virginia. We had Paul Goldman on the other day, running for lieutenant governor. He blasted it, said he hated the wording, said it was misleading. Now there's an opposition group saying this really isn't a good idea. And I wanted to get your thoughts on it, Marcus Simon. What is the matter with changing the way we draw the district lines in Virginia that get the politicians out of it?
Well, I would be all in favor of changing the way we do redistricting to get the politicians out of it. Unfortunately, that's not what Amendment 1 does. In fact, what Amendment 1 does is it really solidifies the role of politicians. So you talked about your 8 members. Really, there's 16 members of this commission. 8 of them are legislators. You got 2 Republican senators, 2 Republican delegates. You get 2 Democratic senators and 2 Democratic delegates picked by the leadership of their parties, right? So it's going to be your senior, your most entrenched, your most establishment members of both parties that have been around the legislature for a while. Those are your 8 legislative members. And then we get 8 citizens, right? And there's been a lot of talk about, hey, this is the first time we'll have citizens with a seat at the table. What they don't talk about is how we pick these citizens. The 8 citizen members, these regular folks, are actually picked from a list provided by, you guessed it, the same people that pick the legislators. So the leaders of the Democratic House of Delegates, the leaders of the Republicans in the House of Delegates, and the 2 senators and the 2 from each party, they give a list of acceptable members of the commission to then be picked by a panel of judges. Of course, the judges that serve on that panel also picked by the legislators, right? So if you could get politicians out of this, if you could have a system where you had citizens and professionals, academics, good government types, objective people drawing districts that were fair and made sense and reflected Virginia, I'd be all for it. In fact, I proposed doing just that at the last session, but that's not what Amendment 1 does, and that's why we're opposed to it. And like you said in the intro here, we haven't talked a lot about it since it passed, and so that's part of the goal here and the mission. Establishing a group, Fair Districts Virginia, is to get the word out to folks that this really isn't what it's been advertised to be. And if you really believe in redistricting reform and really changing the way we do districts for the better, you should vote no on Amendment 1.
Well, Marcus Simon with us. A lot of Republicans are in favor of this, obviously, because they don't like the district changes that were made by, I guess, the academician in California. A lot of people thought that those were made specifically to get rid of Chris Jones, who had a powerful position. He controlled the money, tried to get rid of Kirk Cox, who was the speaker at the time. A lot of Republicans thought that was kind of a sham for political reasons, so they were looking for an alternative. And the Republicans seemed to be behind this, but you also had a lot of Democrats. Remember, this thing passed both the House and the Senate with Democratic votes 2 times straight. So why was it good then, but it's bad now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So just to be clear about who is supporting this, the exact same people that brought you the gerrymandered 2011 maps are big supporters of this amendment. It's Republicans in the House, it's Republicans in the Senate, and it's Dick Saslaw and George Barker, who are my good friends, and I love working with them on a number of important issues, who also cut a deal with Bill Howell in 2011 to have everybody to ignore the redistricting commission that Bob McDonnell had established and just go back to drawing districts the way they always had and cut House Democrats out of the process because they were anxious to get it done. So that's how we got our districts in 2011, and that is the bipartisan group of folks that are pushing this amendment. It's the serial gerrymanderers of the General Assembly. And there's a reason they're doing that, because they like to be able to have politicians drawing their maps. Now, Republicans that are suspicious of academics and special masters and so forth should be very wary of Amendment 1. If you didn't like the results of our most recent redistricting in 2018 or 2019 that was done by a special master, then you really don't like Amendment 1, because what happens with this amendment is any two of the legislative members essentially can veto the commission's maps and send this to the Supreme Court to draw maps instead. And of course, the Supreme Court is not going to sit there. The justices won't sit there and draw the maps. They'll do what the court did last time, which is go find a special master or an academician, as you called them, some liberal elite from a university somewhere, to come out and draw the districts. And that's how we'll get our districts done. Most likely, I think most people think, for better or for worse, that this thing is built to fail. It requires a supermajority. It requires cooperation of all the parties that people just don't think is realistic. So I think most people think that we're going to end up having the Supreme Court draw districts under this amendment. It won't be the legislature, I guess, which is good. But if you didn't like the outcome of the most recent map redrawing, then you probably won't want to vote for Amendment 1.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with House of Delegates member Marcus Simon, Democrat, Northern Virginia, talking about Amendment 1, which is a districting reform amendment that would be baked in the cake in Virginia, would be baked in, it would be part of the Constitution of how you come up with what the various state House of Delegates and state Senate districts are. So, Marcus, let me ask you this. I saw one poll recently that somebody showed me, and it was a little shocking to me. Republicans were backing this by 55%. I would have thought it would have been 90% because of what happened to them, but it was only 55%. Why?
You know, that's a great question. I think that, frankly, I think Republicans tend to be a little more skeptical of the so-called reform movements. I think Democrats, to your point, we've had a little more difficulty with our own grassroots because, if you can sell this as just redistricting reform, it sounds pretty good to people. We're progressives. We like change for the sake of change sometimes, and they haven't looked at the details of it. And I suspect that conservatives, as the name suggests, are probably a little more skeptical of reform and change for the sake of change without understanding and knowing what the details are. And so hopefully, as we get closer to election, I'd say, you used to say election day, but election season, starting in the middle of September, really, people will take a little more critical view of this. And I think also it's important that if you have doubts about something, if you're not sure what it does, the idea of baking it into the Constitution, as you describe it, right, and putting it in there, the Constitution is very difficult to change. And once stuff gets in there, it's hard to get it out. To take this sort of untested, unproven concept and experiment for how we draw districts and put it into the Constitution, I think probably a lot of people are pretty skeptical of that.
The recent polling I saw showed that it had more Democrat support than Republican support. As I said, I was surprised at both of those things. And I know the pro-amendment forces have raised a considerable amount of money to get this passed. How do you stop it? I mean, if you don't like it, how do you stop it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's funny, we just recently saw some of the numbers starting to come back from how much lobbying was done and how much money was spent in the 2020 session. You talk about the fact that this passed the legislature both times. Well, that wasn't by accident. It wasn't easy. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on lobbying efforts, more than groups like the NRA during the legislative session. And I expect that they'll bring out the big bucks to try and do some voter disinformation to make their case here as we get to Election Day. So what we're trying to do is we've created a PAC, Political Action Committee, trying to raise some money and trying to get the word out to people about the details. And it's sort of hard to message the details, but trying to get a message out that this amendment is dangerous. It's not proven. It's going to go into the Constitution, and that if you're in doubt, essentially, if you're not sure, vote no. Don't vote for something to go into the Constitution that you're not sure about. And that's going to be a big part of the message. Hopefully, we'll be able to mount a digital campaign. I think, in 2020 and 2021, the idea of doing everything by a very expensive direct mail campaign to the whole state is a little anachronistic. I think we'll be able to reach people digitally, target people that we know are paying attention or are likely to cast a ballot on this issue. And, as you know, a huge number of people are showing up in 2020 to vote on Donald Trump. For better or for worse, this is a referenda, I think, on the Trump presidency. And so a lot of the people showing up at the polls probably will have no idea that there's a ballot question
I agree with
at
that.
all to be voted on.
I agree with that. I think that's spot on. I mean, like Amendment 1, if I were to ask 100 people that called into my show what Amendment 1 is, probably 2 out of the 100 would have any idea what the hell it was. So that's one of the other things. And so, one of the advantages I think the opponents have in maybe defeating this is I'm always reluctant to vote for constitutional amendments if I don't understand it. Now, this one I understand. I was appalled by the redistricting that got done for the 2019 race. So, I would vote in favor of this, Marcus, only because, as a Republican, you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to get screwed again. But what you're saying is that this is worse than the other way. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, that's what I'm saying. This is going to, again, particularly if you're an anti-establishment Republican, right? Because this is going to be picked by the leadership of the House, leadership of the Senate. And then I guess what's worse than that is it's built to fail, right? It's built for compromise. It requires a majority of the legislators, 6 out of the 8 legislators, and 6 out of the 8 citizens to agree. So you got to get 12 out of 16. I don't know if you follow politics, right? I think the idea of getting 12 out of 16 members that are picked to be some of the most partisan and the most entrenched in their parties and putting them together in a room is a recipe for failure, which sends this thing to the Supreme Court, which is going to have to hire a special master, which means it's going to duplicate the 2019 process that you say screwed the Republicans. I mean, that's the most likely outcome. I think everybody agrees is that we end up with an academic doing it, or you end up with a bunch of horse trading amongst the politicians to get to that compromise, which is what gerrymandering sort of always been about. And it means incumbents protecting themselves, drawing themselves into safe districts. It means people considering a lot of the things that we don't like politicians to do when they draw maps. The idea that we'll all sit down and do this, but a professor from William and Mary kind of explain to us why these are good districts and then vote for them, I think is hopelessly naive.
Marcus Simon with us, House of Delegates member, Democrat, Northern Virginia. What's the name of the PAC, Marcus?
So we are Fair Districts Virginia. You can find us on Facebook. It's Fair Districts VA. Find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. We have a website, which is fairdistrictsva.com or fairdistrictsvirginia.com. Both of them will point you to the same place. It gives you an opportunity to contribute to the cause, to learn more about who we are and what we're up to, and help get the word out to folks that there's this amendment that's on the ballot that, again, I think most people don't know is there and haven't paid much attention to, and that if you're not sure, you're absolutely sure that this is the right thing to do, you ought to vote no.
This is going to be interesting because it's what you're up against now is the messaging, and I'm going to take my own view out of it a second, just
sure.
be as candid as I can. The messaging of reform is powerful, right? So their messaging is reform redistricting. Well, I'm in favor of that, right? I don't like the way it's gone down, so I'm in favor of reforming it. Your messaging is, I don't know what it is. It's don't reform it that way, and it's a constitutional amendment. I mean, you have to get into the detail to sell it, which really makes it tough, Marcus.
Well, yeah. As you know, there's a saying in politics: when you're explaining, you're losing, right?
Right.
And
exactly.
The position requires a lot of explaining. Yeah, with the exception that I think, the message is really that this amendment. If you don't know what it is, don't vote to put it in the Constitution. If you're not sure, if you have any doubts, vote no. When in doubt, vote no on an amendment that is going to make changes that could be hard to undo. It's also the gerrymandering amendment. I mean, I don't know how much that resonates with the general public. I know those of us in politics know what gerrymandering is. This amendment really does bake gerrymandering into it. And I guess our messaging is, if you don't like having politicians draw their own districts, vote no, because the amendment is politicians drawing their own districts. They have an advantage, in a number of ways. I don't deny that this is sort of an underdog's fight here.
Right.
They've had it's passed. There's a presumption by a lot of folks that if it made it to the ballot, and it got through that process, it must be okay. So we're fighting an uphill battle. There's no doubt. But I think it's the one that's worth pursuing.
All right. Let's switch gears a second, Marcus Simon. On Friday, Virginia Democrats are allowing Delegate Lee Carter from Manassas to follow through on his promise to defund the police with a budget amendment that he's proposing, slash our Virginia State Police budget by 25%, with another $41 million in cuts. Kay Corey, your colleague, Democrat Fairfax, wants to cut millions from the school resource officer program. It looks like Democrats are trying to slide this big cut for law enforcement in. How do you respond to this?
Well, we are following the process that actually I think Chris Jones and before him Lacey Putney established with the budget, which is, in the old days, the budget was written in a dark, smoke-filled room by the appropriators, and most of the delegates didn't have anything to say about how that process was done or any input into it. So what we have is a very open process that allows any delegate to propose amendments. Most of those amendments do not make it into the budget. I don't think these are amendments that are going to make it into the budget. I'm not an appropriator, and I certainly don't want to speak for Appropriations Chair Luke Torian. He's more than capable of speaking for himself. But I think that folks are reading a little bit too much into the fact that these amendments were introduced. Anybody can introduce an amendment that says anything. Every amendment gets an opportunity to be heard. I won't say it gets a hearing, but it has an opportunity to be heard. People have an opportunity to make their case, but then ultimately it's up to the members of the Appropriations Committee and to the whole House and whole Senate to decide what gets into the budget. So, again, I wouldn't read too much into the fact that these amendments were proposed. I don't think that those are amendments that are likely to make it in to the budget based on my conversations with Democratic delegates.
Delegate Simon, let me I don't mean to paraphrase you, but I want to be sure I understood what you said. You have an open process where any delegate can offer amendments to the budget. Lee Carter of Manassas, who was an avowed socialist and also was pepper sprayed and had an altercation not too long back with cops, threatened that he would try to defund them, right? That's common knowledge. Everybody knows that. It's been all over the media. But what you're saying is just because he's proposing a police budget cut by 25% in an amendment, and just because Kay Corey is proposing cutting millions from the school resource officer program, what you're telling me is that doesn't have backing of the Democrat leadership in the House or the appropriations leadership, and they're likely not to go anywhere. Is that a fair assessment of what I've heard?
With one exception, that I don't speak certainly in this capacity. I'm here as Delegate Marcus Simon from the 53rd District. But my impression of how these conversations have gone is that those are proposals that are serious to the people that put them in, and they take them very seriously, and I think they care deeply about these issues. But I don't think that is the direction that I've heard we're going as far as the budget's concerned. We have a lot of work to do on police reform. We have a lot of resource needs. I think we have a lot of ways that we can reinvest and move money, not even move money, but make larger investments in things that help people avoid the criminal justice system. But I think these two specific proposals are not necessarily things that are going to make it into this year's and this particular session's budget.
All right. We have to understand the process that anybody can propose these things, even though it might be damaging politically. Lee Carter can propose cutting state police budget by 25%. That doesn't mean that is, because the way it's been presented is this is Democrat leadership orthodoxy. They want to cut police funding and they're sneaking it in. What you're basically saying is that's just not true. That's just one guy. Right.
Well, that's one guy, and it's certainly not sneaking it in. It's a public and a transparent process. Everybody's amendments get published online. That's how they weren't discovered or found. I mean, we put it out there. The General Assembly. We put it out there for everybody to see. I think for some people, there are bills that people put in every session that are political messaging bills. They're opportunities for them to sort of show where they stand on an issue. Some people use the budget and the amendment process the same way. Look, I don't blame Republicans for then trying to paint every Democrat with the actions of one or two. That happens every year. Look, it happened with me. I put in a bill a few years ago on democracy vouchers to try and bring some opportunities for public financing that after I put it in, realized it had a potential price tag that was millions and millions of dollars. And so, of course, Republicans pointed to the price tag, not the underlying concept, and then said Democrats want to spend tens of millions of dollars on politician welfare, right? And I don't blame anybody for messaging it that way. I probably would have done the same thing. But just understand what it is, right? This is just sort of it's politicians being politicians. Substantively, this is not something that I think has broad support in the way that it's put forward in these amendments.
Okay, Marcus Simon, Delegate Simon, thank you for your time today. It's always good to have you on, sir, and it's always good to get your candor. Thanks for clearing that up and explaining your opposition to Amendment 1. We'll have you back on. Thank you, Mark.
All right, thanks, John. Talk to you soon.